It was a bit of a strange year at the wide receiver position, with some underperforming elite players, a lot of quarterback injuries, and what seemed like a down year just across the board compared to the elite performances that we saw at the running back position. But that doesn't mean that the players are any less elite, and with a few exciting prospects coming through the draft and one big name free agent especially, the wide receiver landscape is going to be so interesting this offseason. Let's take a little bit of a look. So, starting off as always with my elite tier, and this was quite a difficult one. If you're just looking at my tier 1 wide receivers right at the top, that's Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson, and then there's a gap to the next tier. In terms of, so I have Jamar Chase as my wide receiver 1 currently over Justin Jefferson. I can really see the argument either way. These are players that you want to build your entire dynasty roster around. They are going to be league winners every single year. The slight difference comes down to two things for me. First of all, it's locked in quarterback play. So we know Jamar Chase is going to be locked into Joe Burrow. I'll be honest, probably every year that he's in the league. Those two are best friends and on long-term contracts at the Bengals. Justin Jefferson, it's probably, I would suggest, going to be JJ McCarthy this season. They could franchise tag Sam Darnold, but I'd be surprised. Obviously, we're just coming off the back of a slightly down year for Justin Jefferson, although part of that is due to Sam Darnold, whereas Jamar Chase obviously just won the Triple Crown. But this isn't really a recency bias thing. I think they've been sort of flat at the top for a while. And then the other thing that makes me put Chase slightly over Jefferson is just that week winning performance with Jamar Chase. So he had 3 games over 30 points this season. He has the tendency to, when he finishes as the wide receiver 1 in a week, he completely breaks the slate wide open. Like, he's the must-have player in DFS. He's absolutely going to win you weeks because he'll have the occasional week a season, 2 or 3 times where he goes 150 yards and multiple touchdowns. So for me, that's the reason why I have him as my wide receiver 1, kind of long-term outlook with the quarterback play, and then sort of short term the ability to just win any week with Jamar Chase in your lineup. But obviously Justin Jefferson elite too. I don't want people coming saying that I think Justin Jefferson's a scrub. It was quite difficult with my elite tier to decide where to stop it. So I was really close with Amon-Ra St. Brown, Malik Neighbors, Nico Collins, and Brian Thomas Jr. That's my next 4 wide receivers after these. I decided to call it after Puka Nacua and CeeDee Lamb. So CeeDee Lamb, obviously the wide receiver 1 last year, down year this year, but playing with Cooper Rush for the majority of it. Dak Prescott will be back. They still don't have anything at wide receiver 2. He's going to have ridiculous volume. I think we're forgetting about CeeDee Lamb a little bit just because of, we had these 2 fantastic rookies coming in and some other fantastic rookies as well, like Lad McConkey. Xavier Worthy had a good end to the season. We still have Marvin Harrison Jr., who's really difficult to value after a really disappointing rookie season. But CeeDee Lamb, like, we've seen him do it before. He's still relatively young. He's locked in with the same quarterback for a while that we know is going to force feed him. Puka Nacua, he's my wide receiver 3. This might be a homerish move. I don't think it is. If you look at yards per route run in different aspects last season, and bear in mind he only played 11 games, he was second in yards per route run against man, first against zone, first from out wide, first from in the slot. Like, this is not just someone who flashes with the eye test. This is someone where the metrics and the data shows how elite they are at wide receiver. He was incredible down the stretch. He was an absolute league winner in the end of the season. If you managed to trade for him when he got hurt, you probably ended up winning your league. I know the quarterback position isn't going to be locked in for Puka Nacua. That's kind of the danger, is Matthew Stafford. I think will probably retire next offseason. I don't think we'll lose him this offseason, but I don't think the Rams have a huge plan for what's going to happen afterwards. Whether it ends up being Jimmy Garoppolo for a year or whether they draft someone this year, I wouldn't be surprised to see them draft someone in the first round. But the talent that Puka Nacua has shown through just his first year in the league locks him into that wide receiver 3 spot for me. I can see the argument with Lamb flipping either way, and then those next 4 definitely elite wide receivers, but just slightly behind this elite tier for me at this point in time. Then on to my at-risk players. Now, for a small caveat here, obviously wide receiver doesn't quite work the same as quarterback and running back in terms of someone else can come in and take your job. It's not a sort of one-for-one position. So this is more players that I think are at risk of either losing their roles or being cut this off-season. So the top three that I've had here, and this is all looking through over the cap for players that I think are going to be a likely cap casualty, especially compared to their play with their current contracts going into next season. Deebo Samuel, I think, is as good as gone. And we're going to touch on this a little bit later, but really disappointing this season. Not the same player that we've seen the last few years, and the 49ers actually have a decent group of wide receivers to replace him. None that can do the thing that he can do. But in Brandon Ayuk, when he's healthy, Ricky Pearsall, who broke out towards the end of the year, who I'm going to talk about later, and Juwan Jennings as well. I think they'll be fine without Deebo Samuel. So I think I'd expect them to move on from him. Christian Kirk, again, a gigantic cap hit this next season, but they can cut him for a relatively small amount of dead money, and I think $8 million in cap savings. I wouldn't be surprised to see him either restructure his deal or like do a small extension to bring the money in this year way down. Or end up on the open market, but I don't think the Jags will look to continue with Christian Kirk, and I'd probably be looking to move on. Tyler Lockett, again, is coming towards the end of his career, but they can cut him for basically nothing. And they have their two starting wide receivers. Tyler Lockett was pretty much irrelevant last season. So these are the three players I think are at risk. The free agent class this year is interesting. It's basically T. Higgins at the top. So T. Higgins is the big one. That's the domino which is going to cause everything else to fall into place around the league. I think he either gets franchise tagged again or a long-term extension with Cincinnati. I think they want him to stay in Cincinnati. I think he wants to be there. I think he just needs to be paid what he's worth. And he broke out to the end of the season. Not really broke out. We already knew how good T. Higgins was, but he was dominant towards the end of the season. So I think he can command a significant amount of money. If he hits the open market, if they don't franchise tag him, I don't think he's coming back. I think someone like the Patriots or the Raiders, who, you know, the two highest amounts of cap in the NFL, I think they're going to throw sort of $32 to $34 million a year at him, and I don't think he ends up back in Cincinnati. And good for him if he wants to go out there and get paid instead of staying with a cheap organisation. The other wide receivers on the list, you know, older players who might get a one-year deal somewhere, probably players you're not looking to trade for in Dynasty, but if they have a good landing spot, it might be the case that you can trade them away. The one exception I would say, even though he is, you know, entering his age 30 season, is Chris Godwin. He was on course to be like the wide receiver 2 this season before he got hurt. It was such a shame when he went down in such a needless situation, but Chris Godwin's really interesting to me in terms of where he ends up, whether he ends up back with Tampa Bay or whether he ends up sort of being the best friends to a rookie quarterback or even to Drake May. I think he'd fit in really nicely there as a skill set they don't really have. The others, Diggs, Allen, Cooper, I think they're really on the way out. But a lot of these at-risk players are going to tie in some of the players that are going to get bigger opportunities later, as you're going to see in my trade targets. Two of these especially very, very relevant to my trade targets. If you are enjoying this video, please consider liking and subscribing. I am so close to starting off my rookie prospect profiles. That is going to be my next series. Once I'm through looking at the positional landscapes, I have 50 prospects ready to go, and I'm going to do 50 prospect profiles in 50 days. I hope you're ready for that. I hope you're excited. But let's take a look at some trade targets at the wide receiver position. So then on to my trade targets, and two of these are people I touched on a little bit earlier today. Rome Odunze should at least be the wide receiver 2 in this offense now. Caleb Williams with another year to develop. Keenan Allen as a free agent. It was always a bit confusing where Keenan Allen was seeing the field over him anyway. I loved Rome Odunze coming out. He was the consensus wide receiver 3. He was my wide receiver 3. I think he'd be at least wide receiver 2 in this class. He might actually be wide receiver 1 in this class. So I absolutely love him. I'd be willing to pay anything after about the 103 for him. And to be honest, I'd probably consider it with the 102. I know it was a disappointing rookie season, but I can definitely see the argument for him. Ricky Pearsall next up. Like, as I said, I think Deebo Samuel is out of here. Brandon Ayuk might not be able to start the season. I think Ricky Pearsall showed a really good connection with Brock Purdy down the stretch. I'm really intrigued by him next year. And I think he's probably someone you can get for kind of a late first, even though, again, I think he'd be probably wide receiver 4 in this class. So I'd be more than happy taking him with anything about the 109, 110, somewhere around there. And then a cheaper one for you, Jacoby Myers. Currently the wide receiver 1 in Las Vegas. Obviously Brock Bowers there as well, but there's nothing else at the wide receiver position. Don't know what the starting quarterback situation is going to be. potentially Shedeur Sanders is looking pretty likely at the minute, but they're going to end up with a new quarterback of some kind. And even if they don't, even if it's still AOC or Gardner Minshew, Jacoby Myers is going to be peppered with so much volume. He was a wide receiver 2 down the stretch after Devontae Adams got traded. I think he'll probably be the same next season, and you can probably get him for like a mid to late second at this point, so a pretty easy flex play to just be able to plug into your lineup if you need. And then finally, my rookies to watch. So this is my current top 5, and this is changing all of the time. Ted McMillan is currently the wide receiver 1. He is consensus wide receiver 1. He is a incredibly physical alpha wide receiver, but also a good route runner as well. So not sort of in that Quentin Johnston or even thinking back to N'Keal Harry type thing where they're physical, they're contested catch winners, but they can't run routes and they're not going to be able to deal with it in the NFL. He's a really good route runner as well. So someone that I think is going to be able to go in and compete straight away. He's going to be the wide receiver 1 in this class. I have Luther Burden very, very close to him. I really like him. I wrote him up for DLF the other day, and I love the route running. I love the athleticism. I love the yak ability. I think he can work outside. He didn't really play too much outside, but even if you want to just bring him in as your starting slot wide receiver, I think he's going to absolutely feast. I think he's so pro ready. So he's actually quite close to Ted McMillan for me. I tweeted yesterday that I might consider swapping the two, but we'll see. We'll see as I get later down the process. Emeka Egbuka, the next wide receiver out of Ohio State, thought he was coming out last year, so I did a lot of the scouting on him then, but then he didn't. Again, very similar in terms of very crisp route runner, good athleticism, good solid all-round player. Not really got sort of the same high-end outcomes as McMillan or Burden, but a very, very high floor. So someone that I really like. Trey Harris currently slotting in as my wide receiver 4. This is, again, your typical ex-wide receiver. Contested catch monster, huge wingspan. I mean, a huge frame, but the wingspan is incredible. But also, like, great ability to catch with his hands, great ability to work at the catch point. Above average route running for someone his size. Has a tendency to round off some routes, but he was able to in college because he's just that much bigger than anyone else, especially earlier in his career before he transferred to Ole Miss. But someone that I really like. And then Travis Hunter, again, with a little asterisk here, because who knows what he's going to be. If he ends up playing at wide receiver, he'll probably slot in as my wide receiver 3. Potentially wide receiver 2 above Burden, but I think he's just below Tet for me. But we don't really know what Travis Hunter's going to be at the next level yet, and I think this is the real risk. What if his name is called as defensive back? Then it's going to be really hard to draft him. If it's called as wide receiver, then you can take him in the first round and feel pretty happy about it. But it's very difficult to know what he's going to be in the NFL just yet. So I'm keeping him at wide receiver 5. I don't really know what to do with him at this point, but we will see come the NFL draft where he's actually going to end up playing. So that is going to do it for today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm going to be finishing off with the tight end landscape in the next few days. And after that, we are straight on to the rookie scouting profiles. I hope you're excited for them. I hope you enjoy the conference championships later today, and I will see you next time.